Good afternoon and welcome to ASCD's Whole Child Symposium. ASCD is a membership association of educators from all roles: teachers, principals, administrators, professors, and superintendents, working for the success of each learner with a strong commitment to a whole child approach to learning. Our programs, products, and advocacy focus on learning, teaching, and leading, always with the student at the center. We are headquartered in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area with members in more than 120 nations around the world. We are delighted to have each of you with us today, either in person or virtually. Today's symposium looks at the teacher leader. Just who is this teacher leader and what does a teacher leader do? Might he assume part of the principal's responsibilities? Does she coach and mentor other teachers? Does he lead curriculum teams? Does she model exemplary instructional practices? Yes, 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 and yes. Why is this role so important, and why is it getting so much attention at this time? I'll posit a few ideas, and I'm sure that our panelists will add many more. First, what happens in schools is more complex than ever and cannot be accomplished with strict division between administrators and teachers. The leadership and responsibility for student learning must be a collaborative effort. If teacher leaders can help change school cultures so that teachers and principals collaborate to build a culture of learning, everyone benefits. Second, teachers need paths to professional growth that don't require them to leave the classroom. Many teachers say that they want more responsibility, but they want to be teachers in the classroom. If that's where they choose to be, we need to define and grow the teacher leader role. An abundance of research and common sense says that kids learn best with skilled, experienced teachers. And finally, I do think it's important to use the phrase teacher leader with some precision. This is not a label for someone who simply receives a stipend for additional work. This is someone whose role in school includes real and differentiated responsibility and accountability in one of many areas: instructional coaching and feedback, action research, distributed leadership, etc. So let's find ways to define multiple teacher leader roles. Today is an opportunity to explore these ideas through multiple lenses. I look forward to hearing from each of our presenters. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you everybody for coming here live and also tuning in live via our live stream, and welcome to the Whole Child Symposium, Fall 2014. This is coming direct to you from the Night Studio here at the Museum in Washington, D.C., and it's being brought to you, as Judy said, by ASCD and also ASCD's Whole Child Initiative. I'm Sean Slade. I'm the Director of Whole Child Programs at ASCD, and I'll be the moderator today of what will be two panels of approximately 60 minutes each, and then followed by a 30-minute question and answer format. There'll be questions from the live audience and also questions from the online audience if they use the Twitter hashtag WCS14. You can also, if anybody is not already doing that, watch the live stream, both live and then archived, probably hopefully next week, on our website ascd.org/WC Symposium. Now, we did do a symposium back in spring, and we talked about the purpose of this symposium, because this is the second symposium that we've organised out of ASCD. And we do have a a catchphrase which is up there on the screen that talks about the purpose of this symposium. But really, when you nail it down, we're talking about the fact that we need to be more proactive in the education debate as opposed to reactive. We want to discuss the most relevant issues needed to be discussed in education today. And we also want to put educators in front of the education debate, whilst maintaining a focus on the whole child, who is the focus of what we do in the schools. Now, interestingly, we have 100% of our panellists who are educators, either current teachers or current principals or former administrators, or work for organisations such as ASCD that are involved in the education sector. And there was a recent Washington Post article that did a survey about how many of the cable news networks actually have educators as guests on their panels. Remember, we have 100%. They had a whopping 9% guests. So this really is us putting our money where our mouth is and putting educators back in front of the educational debate. I did mention as well that we did a symposium in the spring which looked at the future of education, and it was entitled Choosing Your Tomorrow Today. And the theme for this symposium is teacher leadership, the what, the why, the how of teachers as leaders. We want to discuss what is a teacher leader and why this role is important or even critical to teaching and learning. And how can or should one become a teacher leader? And how can administrators or even the educational system best develop teacher leaders? Because the role of teachers as leaders has the potential to boost both the process of teaching and learning, but also the teaching profession. And there's widespread agreement about the great value of teacher leaders and the importance of recognising or even cultivating this role. There are a myriad of definitions, however, whether we talk about specialists or instructional coaches, mentors, peer colleagues, or team leaders. There is ambiguity out there. And so hopefully today we'll start to clarify some of that ambiguity. Should this be a formalised role, or should it be an organic role? Should we have steps in place, or should we allow schools to develop their own teacher leaders for their own needs? Two little charts that I'll leave you with before we start the first panel, which will be more on a systems approach and an organisational approach, was this EdPulse survey that came out a couple of weeks ago. And it was highlighting some of the ambiguity around the role of teacher leaders, and I asked two questions. What do you think is the primary characteristic of a teacher leader? And also, how should states go about cultivating teacher leaders? For the first question, there was strong support for teacher leaders being primarily an influence in the school setting, and with a strong focus on school climate or school culture. These professionals were viewed as influencers, but also as mentors in providing colleagues instructional practices, but for many, as yet, not holding formal leadership roles outside the classroom. The second question asked how states could work towards developing these roles. Compensation was key, along with recognition, and along with developing networks and perhaps even formal teacher leader certification that many states have begun. Today we'll explore these themes, concerns and topics as we discuss the value and role of developing teacher leaders. And so at this time, I'd like to introduce everyone to our first panel, who's alongside me here on the stage, and one that takes, as I mentioned, a more systems-based and organisational look at teacher leadership. So, first to my left, we have Maddie Fennell. With 25 years' experience as a teacher, Maddie now works in a hybrid role as a literacy coach at Miller Park Elementary School in Omaha, and as a teaching ambassador fellow for the US Department of Education. She serves as Secretary of the National Network for State Teachers of the Year and on the Board of Directors for the Nebraska State Education Association. Welcome, Maddie. And next to Maddie, we have Becky Pringle. Becky serves as Vice President of the National Education Association, the nation's largest labour union and professional association for educators. A middle school science teacher with 31 years of classroom experience. There we go, putting educators back in front again, as we mentioned. Pringle has distinguished herself as a thoughtful, passionate advocate for educators and students, focusing on issues of educator empowerment and student success, diversity, and developing future leaders. Welcome, Becky.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Tanya Tucker. As Vice President of Alliance Engagement for America's Promise Alliance, Tanya oversees the community and partner engagement elements of the Alliance's Grad Nation campaign, including the Grad Nation Communities Network, Grad Nation Community Summits, and Alliance National Partners. Welcome, Tanya. And I will take my seat and we will begin the first question. So the first question is a fairly simple and straightforward one. And I'm going to pose it to everybody on the panel, but I'm going to start with you, Maddie. Okay. And it really is, what is a teacher leader and when did this role come into being and why is the role suddenly getting so much attention now?
Well, I think that there are several different ways that you can categorize teacher leader. First of all, this is not something new that just came into being. Every teacher is a leader in one way or another. So I think it's important that we classify informal leaders and formal leaders, as well as leaders who are self-distinguishing. You see yourself as a leader, or as someone from the outside has seen abilities in you that they want to pull out and have you lead others. So it's nothing new. It is something that's getting a new focus. And I think the reason that we are focused on this today is because, as was mentioned earlier, there is such a greater complexity to the work of a teacher. We know that there is more expected of teachers today, and in order to get everything done in the timeframes that we have and have all children reach their level of proficiency, there have to be more hands-on in the game. And we have traditionally placed all of that burden on principals, but we cannot continue to do that and expect a system that's going to be able to actually work well. It needs to be all hands on deck with everyone working their full set of skills to the betterment of students. Another way to put it is, I believe that we can't just expect teachers to be an implementer of policy without also being in the development of policy, without being in the development and leadership. One of my friends, Justin Minkle, who's a fabulous teacher leader in Arkansas, calls it the implementation gap, which is the gap between the things that people who make decisions say that teachers should do, and then the teachers on the ground, and they're knowing what will work and will not work. And so we have to put those people together, and we do that by allowing teachers to not only practice their craft in the classroom, but also allow them to lead at the same time.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. I like the way you also mentioned the focus of why we're there, which is the child, and also keeping that in mind at all times.
Absolutely.
Becky?
Let me begin by commending ASCD in their Whole Child initiative. And it will be at the heart of a lot of the comments that I make today, and Maddie mentioned them previously, but it's so important for us not to focus on just one piece of the system. We have to think of our students, our children, as whole people. And we have to figure out how we surround them with safe and nurturing learning conditions and make sure that they come to school every day healthy, to make sure that we have caring and qualified adults throughout the education system, from the teachers to the support professionals, to the administrators, and then the community as well. And so I just wanted to say that's very exciting for us at the NEA, because we've been approaching our work from that place for a long time. So this piece of the system that we're talking about today in teacher leadership, I could just say ditto to what Maddie just said. She's absolutely correct. We've been leaders, teachers have been leaders since forever. We've been problem solvers, and we can probably all think back in our careers where we saw a problem and we said, we need to step up to help to deal with that. For me, it came in recognizing the growing achievement gap between our African American students, particularly our boys, that continued to widen as time went on. And I went to my superintendent at the time and I said, we should collaborate. I was a local president. We should collaborate on how we can try to fix this. Of course, when you speak up, the first thing that happens is, well, Becky, you do that. Why don't you lead that? So I didn't back away from that challenge, but we worked together to do that. And so that's my story, but that's a story that most every teacher can tell, whether it's in their district or their classroom. So they have been leaders. What we're looking at, and when I think about teacher leadership in this new context, is being intentional about it, more intentional about it. So you heard Maddie talk about formal and informal, and those are kind of the words I would use, but we've got to intentionally take this on, because if we are going to face, as a nation, if we're going to face the challenges that we know exist today, let alone the ones we can't even imagine for tomorrow, with increased challenges from a more diverse population, more of our students coming to us who are living in poverty, more who arrive at our schoolhouse doors who don't have English as a first language. And by the way, technology having a huge impact on how fast things change. We have got to have, Maddie said, all hands on deck. We've got to have our educators, our professionals, positioned, trained, supported, provided with the time, the compensation. All of those things go into developing teacher leaders in an intentional way, so that it will always have informal teacher leaders, always. But as we think about more formalized roles, that we go far beyond what we used to think about, from department leaders to even mentors, that we think about it intentionally and begin planning for it, by the way, as soon as those students who have identified teaching as a career and go into that track of teacher preparation, as soon as they start that, we need to establish as a standard that you will be a leader and there will be pathways for you in your career path.
Wonderful. I like the words you mentioned. You mentioned intentional, you mentioned empowerment. And it's remarkable to me that we expect students to develop these skills of leadership or teamwork or collaboration, but at the same time, we don't always make the changes for the teaching profession to do the same thing. And so we very often live in this dichotomous world in the education system where we want something for one group, but we don't expect it for the other group that has great influence. Tanya?
Absolutely.
As someone who's outside of the formal education and school system, but representing an organization that's all about youth success, and so we keep youth at the center. So one, just happy to be a part of this conversation. For us, I think teacher leadership is critical for youth success, and the stakes are just way too high for as many young people that there are in this country not graduating from high school, not being able to succeed. And I think accountability is high across the community. So I was so happy to hear you mention community in your remarks. For us, we know that teachers and schools can't do this work alone. And teacher leadership, I think, is critical for really helping a school building build their capacity to increase student learning and student achievement. And not only for what that teacher does inside that school building, but how that teacher leader works with the larger community to drive engagement and support for school goals and for increasing youth success. That to us is key. And I think if you look at not just the teaching profession, but just sort of the workforce as a whole, and this generation that's coming into the workforce, they come in immediately looking for what's my next step, where can I have leadership roles, very different from when I started working. You know, I was just happy to have that position and let me work that for a while. But they come in immediately, you know, where are my pathways to leadership responsibilities and roles? And as you said, they don't want to leave the classroom, but what are some other opportunities I can have? And I think if we want to keep effective, young, good teachers in the classroom for the long haul to help our children succeed, we've got to look at those pathways for leadership.
And if I can follow up, in fact, Tanya, one of the things that we've done is we've unfortunately built in perverse disincentives within our profession, and we only have a tendency to value those who leave the classroom. So when I was named Teacher of the Year, one of the first things people ask me is, well, when are you going to stop teaching? Why? This is my profession. It's what I love. It's what I'm good at. Why would I stop? It's like I would not be honored unless I stopped doing that and I became an administrator or did something else. And because in education, we don't have enough of those career pathways. And Becky, what you said about intentionality, I think is so important, because if it's not intentional, it's not built into the culture. And if it's not built into the culture of the entire building and the entire system, the minute one person who was the spearhead of that is gone, it all falls apart.
Right.
So it has to be intentional, it has to be built into the culture, and it has the time to get that done and to begin to change things.
Well, you've both touched on the third point of the first question, but I'd like to hear a little bit more if you have some more to say about it as well, which is why do you think this role is important and possibly crucial to not only teaching and learning, but also the profession of teaching and the profession of education? Now, Tanya, you talked about the benefit of teaching and learning and teacher leadership. Right. But I think this idea that if we are going to move the profession to the next stage in its development, is developing teacher leaders and this more formal position that you're talking about, Maddie, is that part of this redevelopment of the education profession?
Oh, absolutely. And Tanya said it so well. I mean, and it's true, I think, just as you said, in all professions, but particularly in teaching, you know, we talk a lot about this as a profession, but we don't actually treat it as a profession. Because there aren't any other professions where, because someone went to school, then they think they can set policy. They can make decisions about teaching and learning, what kids should know and be able to do. But that doesn't happen because you went to a doctor that you know all that you need to know about medicine. And so we have a long way to go to change that perception and respect for teaching as a profession. And for me, I think this is such a huge step in that direction. And that's why I really want to hit this again. It's so important that as we train our teachers, they understand that that is going to be their role and responsibility. Because, you know, we throw around the word empowerment a lot. You can't empower someone. You can't. They have to empower themselves. And they do that by having the training and the knowledge and the experience and then the space, obviously. And so I want to hit on one. I have many things to say, but I'll hit just on one. So this, when I talk about the space for empowerment, you know, let's talk specifically about that direct report, if you will, and the principals. We've got to train our principals so that they know what shared leadership looks like. Yeah. They're not threatened by it, but they know that they too can be more empowered. They can empower themselves more when they have a collaborative leadership style that allows not only that community of learners to flourish, but actually elevates the profession. And so we don't spend a lot of time talking about their preparation and ongoing professional development, but that is absolutely key. I had a wonderful opportunity to meet a principal last week during American Education Weekend at the Bailey STEM Middle School in Nashville, Tennessee. And it was the most amazing thing that I had seen. And they had teacher leaders in formal and informal roles, but they have formalized a lot of it, where they were the instructional leaders of the school. And the principal saw them as, you know, he was in charge in terms of being the point person, but he did not view himself in charge of the school. He looked at it as a team approach, which, by the way, included parents and include support professionals. The custodian joined us in our tour around the school and talked with us about his role and responsibility in keeping the school safe. So we saw an example of enlightened principal who understood the power that he got by letting that power go.
But don't you also see, sorry.
No, well, I was just going to say, I think that we don't talk enough about how difficult we've made all of this for principals. And when you mentioned not doing things in isolation and you know, doing things throughout the system, one of the most isolated positions right now is the principal. And they're just overwhelmed. It's like they were trained to be, to a certain degree, managers, and many of them were hired to be managers. And suddenly we've now come to them and we've said, now you're an instructional leader because we gave you this great big binder and it's got nice tabs in it, and it was all about how to be an instructional leader. So now you're supposed to spend 90% to 95% of your time now being an instructional leader. Well, what happened to all the management stuff? Because you still need a manager. And it's like we just discounted the importance of that role. And what that's done to principals is make their workload unmanageable. So using those teachers as instructional leaders is crucial to helping us have principals that can survive beyond a few years and continue to thrive in their roles. Because a great principal is transformative, absolutely transformative to the culture of a building and a community.
Well, it makes no sense very often what we do in education. Like you were saying before, and that's a cliche or but you mentioned before about how when you're an experienced teacher and you're doing effective work in the classroom, for a long time, the only natural step has been to take you out of that classroom and very often put you into a management or administrative role, which doesn't necessarily have any impact on the classroom. But the same can be said, as you mentioned a second ago, that if you have principals who are actually very good administrators or managers, it's also can be unfair or non-commonsensical to actually say, all right, even though you're doing very well at that task, we're going to ask you to be an instructional coach now instead. Let me ask you, Maddie, since we have you next to me as well. The focus of the Teach to Lead initiative from the Department of Education, which has been launched this year, has been based around teachers, and this is Arnie Duncan speaking, having a voice in the policies and decisions that affect your students, your daily work, and the shape of your profession. So I want to hear from you about where does the department see the greatest benefit coming out of this initiative? We talked about teaching profession growth. We talked briefly around respect for the teaching profession, or teaching and learning effectiveness, or even supporting student growth. Is there one of those that you would say the Teach to Lead is heading towards, or it would be a range of those things?
Well, I think it's important for us as teachers to always say student learning and student growth is always number one for us. But we don't say that aloud enough, I think, because it's so integral to who we are. It's like we don't announce that the sun came up in the morning, so why do I have to announce that student growth is important to me? It's just everything that I'm about. That is my profession. But so of course that's what this is about. But it's not just about getting that done, but it's about how it gets done. So what we're trying to do through Teach to Lead is, number one, we want to highlight where great things are going on, because so often somebody will have a good idea and immediately somebody says, well, but you can't do that. So it's, well, but yeah, you can, because there are places where great things are going on and they're making massive changes and allowing teachers to really lead. I had an opportunity to visit Iowa a few weeks ago, and Iowa has a wonderful new teacher leadership and compensation system that is being funded by the state, supported by the state, but negotiated on the local level and being run by teachers and administrators on the local level, meeting the needs of their community in that space, solving problems together, and teachers are being acknowledged for that work and compensated for that work. So we want to lift up those great examples. We also want to be giving teachers more opportunity to be doing this work. So we have an online platform called Commit to Lead, where teachers can, it's part of our Teach to Lead website, and it's where teachers can go on and they can say, hey, I have this idea, and other teachers can go on and they can say, hey, I tried that, and here's where it worked, and here's where it didn't work, or have you thought of that? So it becomes an online support community for teachers who are doing leadership work to build that together. And the third thing we want to do is, just where appropriate and where the opportunity prevails itself, how can we use the leverage of the department and its resources to help people expand more opportunities for doing this? We know that there are campfires of teacher leadership out there that are transforming buildings and making great learning happen. But we can't in this country have campfires. It has to be broad-based. It has to change the culture of teaching. And that's what we hope to do through Teach to Lead.
Wonderful. Well, let's take that second point that you made about we don't want campfires, we want to actually start a movement here. What do you think is going to be the biggest leverage point to make that change? Is there a certain part of the population we need to convince? Is it principals that we need to convince? Is it teachers themselves? Is it public opinion? What's going to be the biggest leverage to move this?
Well, there's a couple things. Number one, we have to make principals understand that this is not a threat to their position, but teachers want to lead up to their principal. There's a reason I never got an administrator degree. I don't want to be a principal. I want to be a teacher. I want to be leading from my classroom. We have to help principals understand that collaborative point of view and not feel threatened by that. And there are many great principals out there who know that, who understand that, and who are making that work. We need to lift up their stories so that they can tell their colleagues, principal colleagues, this is going to be okay. We'll get you through this. I think the other thing, though, you gotta be willing to call things out and be real about things. And so there are some changes that need to be made in the teaching profession, because sometimes teacher leaders get in front of each other and have an opportunity, or sometimes too much of a tendency, to tear each other down in leadership. We have to address that culture, because that's also a culture of fear. And we have to address that culture so that we realize that we come into this work as colleagues, that we can come into this shoulder to shoulder. And just because I'm in a role of teacher leader right now, doesn't mean that I'm not going to cycle back into my classroom and you're going to be the teacher leader next year. What I like about these teacher leadership roles that are my favorites are that it's an opportunity to either stay in the classroom and do something else, or cycle in and out of the classroom, but you never lose touch. Those strings are tied and they're tight. Your feet are still in the classroom. And if people understand that it could be you later, then that takes away some of that, the green-eyed monster or whatever that would happen.
Yeah. And that's very often the fear, even from some teachers when they move into administration, that you take them away from the kids, you take them out of the classroom. They don't have that day-to-day interaction. The best principals do, because they're out of their office. I know that
Absolutely.
Peter DeWitt, who will come onto our second panel, was doing this frequently, where they would have a no office day, where he would be purposefully outside the office and in the classrooms every single, or at least once a week, and making that point. But not going, I've lost my train of thought there. It'll come back to me in a minute. It'll come back to me. Let's move on to Becky. So Becky, the NEA has also been doing a fair bit of work around teacher leadership, and you've aligned recently with the Kellogg Foundation, as well as the Centre for Teaching Quality and the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, to ramp up this push as well. Can we assume that the NEA feels that if we are to develop teacher leaders, that it should be both formalised and funded?
Yes.
Yes.
That's the short answer. You're absolutely correct. We're very, very, very excited about this work for all the reasons that we've been talking about. But we have a delegate assembly. It's a national convention of 10,000 of our closest friends all over the country, educators who come together every year, and they actually set the policy of the NEA. They're the highest governing body of the NEA. And a couple of years back, 2 years ago, they made a decision that we were going to actually seed money to what we call our Great Public Schools Fund, to really drive what we call our student-centered, union-led work. And at the heart of that work is our Teacher Leader Initiative. And we're beginning with partnerships with a variety of people, but you certainly mentioned that one, and so I'll talk about that. And how we're approaching it is from a place that, teachers are diverse and they have different skills and interests and that kind of thing. And so we're trying to figure out or develop different places where they can come into this leadership journey. And so we've identified three areas. One is instructional leadership, and we've talked a little bit about that this morning, taking that leadership role in promoting teaching and learning, both elevating the profession as well as ensuring that all students are successful. The second piece of that, which we don't talk a whole lot about when we talk about teachers and their profession, but the policy leadership space. There used to be, and I was one of them, teachers that didn't think policy impacted their class. They thought they could close their doors and do what they wanted to do. I think that used to happen, but it doesn't happen anymore. Don't tell anyone. But we have policy coming at us from every single level, from the local level to the state level, and my goodness, the federal level. And we have all of these people making decisions about what our kids should know and be able to do, what teachers should know and be able to, and we've got to train our teachers in policy. They need to be able to understand it. They need to be able to assess it. They need to be able to write it. And by the way, they need to be able to advocate for it, which leads me to my third area of leadership that we're focused on, and that's the association. Leadership. There are statistics that are data that's telling us that within the next 6 years, we will have 2 million new teachers in our classrooms, mostly due to retirement. Unfortunately, a lot of it is due to teachers leaving within the up to 50%, depending on the school district you're in, within the first 3 years of teaching. So we're going to have a huge turnover. That necessarily means that we are going to, as a union, we're going to have different people in our ranks within a very short period of time. And so we feel an urgency to train them on what we call our instructional issues pillar of our unionism. At the NEA, we have 3. There's our traditional advocacy, wages, hours, working conditions, pillar of our unionism, social justice advocacy, pillar of our unionism, and instructional issues, pillar of our unionism. And we feel the urgency to begin to train leaders who will step into union leaders positions like mine, who are steeped in leading in this professional issues pillar of our unionism. So that's our partnership is around training in all of those areas, understanding that every teacher will come at this from a different place.
Yeah. Okay. Let me go on to a quote. And I'm going to open this up to everybody. It was directed at you to start with, or planned to be directed at you to start with, Becky, but we talked about this a little bit earlier in the green room before we came out here. This was a recent educational leadership article from ASCD called "The Time is Ripe Again" by Roland Barthes. And in the article he cited several obstacles to develop teacher leaders as roles, as a role and as a recognised position. And one of these obstacles was a notion that teachers tend to want to view themselves as equals. And we talked about this in the green room. And we also had a Twitter chat last night with a whole bunch, I think it was close to 700 teachers who were on that talking about this idea. And it got raised in the Twitter chat as well, that there's this idea that if you want to become a teacher leader, you might be disrupting the boat. You might be seeing yourself as better or more informed or more important than somebody else. Let me just read this last little quote from Roland, then I'll get your response and also the response from Tanya and Maddie as well. It's just a very levelling profession. Teachers are, in a way, their own worst enemy when it comes to unlocking leadership because they don't want to welcome it, typically don't respect it, and often feel threatened by one of their own taking it on. Anyone who bumps above the level is subject to condemnation. Who the heck do you think you are? I'm not talking about trends, I'm talking about people impeding teacher leadership. Some of the people are called principals and some are called teachers. So, what's your reaction to that?
How much time you got? Certainly, there are examples of what you just said. I mean, that he put that in his book suggests that. But things have changed a lot. Tanya alluded to that before. Things have changed. The teachers that are in our classrooms today have expectations of themselves and of others that they will step into those roles. And I think that historically, we've painted the leader as someone that, from on high dictated and told you what to do. And we're looking at teaching and learning in a much different way now, from the classroom up. And we're beginning to create that space. And by the way, teachers are creating that space for themselves and understanding that their role and responsibility has grown so much that they can't see that, even to a principal. They can't see that responsibility. And so if they're going to be held accountable, not that I particularly care for that word, but if they're going to be held accountable, by any measure, even measures that make sense, which we could talk about the ones that don't, but if they're going to be held accountable, then they have to have that level of control and responsibility. And they understand that more than the quotes that you're reading there, much more. So I would say that is changing. I'm not going to sit here and say that doesn't exist. But I will tell you, as we grow more and more teacher leaders, that kind of sentiment will go away, because the expectation from the day they step into the classroom, even as they're being mentored, the expectation will be that they will become a leader in some way, either formal or informal. So I see that changing rapidly.
Well, it has to happen anyway, because if we're teaching our students to be leaders in the classroom and in the college and in the university, then they're going to want to try and utilise those skills later on.
Absolutely.
Right. You've got to be able to model that. And just like we say, there's, one size doesn't fit all with student learning. I think one size doesn't fit all with teacher leadership. So like you said, every teacher is going to have an opportunity in their own way to be a leader. And there's so many different aspects to it, and different skill sets that teachers have that they can then use that with their colleagues. I have to believe that teachers particularly want a learning and supportive and collegial and more collaborative environment. Right. It benefits them, it benefits the students, the whole school and environment. So I agree with you that it's changing, and teachers are looking for a different type of environment that's not isolating, that they don't have to be in silos, that they don't have to fear sharing their gifts in a way that help lift up all of their colleagues.
Maddie chaired our NEA commission. She can talk more about this, but on teachers and teaching, and that was one of the biggest recommendations that came out of their report, is that we have to have that new vision of teaching and learning, where we're throwing open our doors and we're collaborating with our peers, and we're not afraid. And that's what we're seeing change. That teachers are not afraid to open their doors, to invite other teachers in, to be critical partners and professionals as they work together to meet the needs of all of their students.
And part of what Becky mentioned earlier about making sure this work is intentional is basing it around actual standards of teacher leadership. We have the teacher leader model standards out there, which are a great roadmap to say, here's how you can lead, and lead with great efficacy and effectiveness. And it gives teachers actually a pedagogy around leadership that's much different than just, become an administrator. It's a pedagogy that shows them how to do this from the classroom. So the quote is really based upon previous positions, and we're talking about setting something up new for the future.
Okay, so take that a little bit further. So what's going to be or I should preface this, is there going to be something which is a tipping point and changes the climate in schools or the culture in schools to have more teacher leaders? Is it having standards, like you were saying, or is it developing more trust in the school environment, or is it a combination of everything?
Standards don't change anything by and of themselves. I think the tipping point will be when you see the relationships between teachers, administrators, parents, the community coming together that's really having a positive impact upon the students. And that's the main tipping point. And one of the things that people frequently ask me is, well, why do we need teacher leaders at all? What's the research around this? Well, it's difficult because it's not there right now. We're creating it as we go, but we will be able to see. I've seen it in my own building, how I'm from a inner city, high poverty building that 5 years ago had the lowest scores in the school district. And this last year ranked second in our school district in our state writing. And we've raised our reading scores, we've raised our math scores, and it's because of collaborative leadership, because we had a leader come in who was dedicated to allowing every teacher to lead. And we saw that impact it had on kids. When we saw that, more people and more people bought in. So I think that's the tipping point. Okay. We can see the impact it has on kids.
Okay.
And I was going to say yes. Again, a short answer, followed by a long answer. I really believe we've reached the tipping point. I really, really do. I think things are happening. Lots of things are happening rapidly. More and more people are moving away from this blame frame of accountability, blaming everyone, blaming teachers, blaming the students themselves, blaming parents, blaming the communities. That blame frame. And so people are restless. And by people, I don't mean just educators. I mean parents and the community and policymakers as well. We see teachers and their unions who are stepping into this space and saying, wait, we can lead on this, and we are going to lead on this, and we are going to demonstrate by actually putting resources in to do it. We see movements that are rising up around the country. There's a lot of unrest. You know, we have lots of conversations, lots of print and ink around comparing us, the U.S., to other countries. Finland and Singapore always rise to the top. And we stop there. We just say, oh, your kids aren't doing so well. Well, are you looking at why?
Absolutely.
Are you looking at those systems? Are they testing the pants off of the kids? No, they're not. They're not doing that.
Yeah.
They're not blaming and shaming. They are investing in teachers and teacher education. They are respecting them. It's the highest paid and most respected professions in those countries. And so when we take a look at places that have had success around these issues, they've taken that on, and they've also taken on the issue of equity. Equity of access and opportunity, which we can't lose sight of in this conversation. And then I want to conclude with, I'm going to tag on to something Maddie said. Saul Rubenstein, the Center for American Progress, just released a report that Saul Rubenstein, and I forget his partner's name, it'll come to me in a minute, produced research to support what Maddie just said. That's when you're getting the kind of school improvement, student success that we want for all of our students, is when we have a collaborative model that's in place. And the most successful ones are those that have a collaborative model between the union and management, a collaborative working relationship where they're not just bargaining wages, rights, and working conditions. They are working collaboratively with the community and parents to actually attend to that whole child and provide them with the resources and support that they need to be successful. And so we actually now have research, because we're all about research, evidence to say, we're not just saying that sounds like a good idea. We have research to support that those schools are the ones that are succeeding, and they are being led by teacher leaders.
Yeah, and I think the word that you mentioned about respect and trust, I do think that's key. And I think it's key not only in the school building or in the classroom, but it's key nationally as well. You mentioned Finland and Singapore, and we hear about these PISA results every 3 years, and we wring our hands and wonder why the US is up or down or wherever. There was a quote from the Ontario Minister of Education a couple of years ago that basically summed it up, and he said, who also do very well, by the way, in PISA, and he said, you cannot put in any educational reform effort if you don't have respect and trust of the education system and of educators.
Right.
And I think we tend to try and do one and expect something different. Speaking of relationships and respect, let me go on to Tanya and some of the work of America's Promise. It really is the student, as you were talking about earlier on, and in particular student graduation. And you achieve this via the work of your 5 promises. And if anyone's not familiar with the 5 promises from America's Promise, it is, and I believe it's on the screen there as well, we promise to young Americans that they will grow up with the help and guidance of caring adult relationships, healthy childhoods, safe surroundings, effective education, and opportunities to serve others. So given your organisation's focus on the student, do you see developing teachers as leaders as an important strategy to achieve this goal? And if so, where does it fit in amongst these 5 promises?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take a cue from Becky. Yes, it is very, it is very important to the goal. But our vision at America's Promise is really that every child in America has the opportunity and the support to reach their full potential and to pursue their American dream. And our work is really to inspire, to engage, to unite individuals, institutions, communities, to really create those conditions for success, to keep those 5 promises that you talked about to every child in America so they can succeed and thrive. And we have been focusing through our Grad Nation campaign on high school graduation as an indicator that young people are on track to adult success. We certainly don't see it as an end goal, but a key milestone that young people are at least on the right path to success. And certainly teachers play a critical role in helping us reach our grad nation goal, which is a 90% high school graduation rate by the class of 2020. So no doubt that they're key in this. And teacher leaders, I think, can only strengthen and enhance a school's ability to really increase student learning, student achievement, and create that school culture and environment that really welcomes and invites the fuller community in that education process. So where it fits, I think, in our 5 promises, really we don't view the promises as the separate silos, right? They really should be taken together, and our research shows that when young people have 4 or more of the promises present in their life, they succeed. They're more likely to succeed academically, socially, civically. But there are 2 of the promises that kind of rise to the top, I think, for teacher leaders. And that's our first promise, which really is about caring adult relationships. And obviously our promise for an effective education.
Okay. Do you want to give us some examples about some of the actions that teachers can take,
Sure.
Or teacher leaders can take as well in the school around those 2 promises, the caring adult relationships and the effective education?
Sure. So the caring adult relationships, we really see relationships as central to young people growing up healthy and happy, staying in school, succeeding in school, and really being on that path towards adult success. And we think as much as teachers and teacher leaders, it's important for them to deliver the curriculum and the content and material. It's just as important for them to develop those key relationships with the young people. Earlier this year, we released a report called Don't Call Them Dropouts, and we went directly to young people from around the country who had left school before graduating to really hear their stories, their experiences, what made them, make those decisions that they did. And time again, we heard from them that they felt no one cared about them, right? They didn't have anybody to go to, anybody to turn to or talk to. And thus, they kind of gave up on themselves. They didn't care about themselves. And they desperately were seeking adults who would care about them, who would help support them, guide them through whatever circumstances they were going through. And certainly we don't see teachers having the sole responsibility for that. But they can play a critical role and do play a critical role. I know all of us have heard stories and probably have our own of that teacher we remember who were so special, to us, who meant so much to us. And those stories usually isn't about the specific lesson or the content, right? It's how that teacher made us feel, right? How that teacher engaged with us. It's all about the relationship. And so I think teacher leaders, in addition to helping other teachers with coaching and mentoring around curriculum and classroom practices, I think there's a role for them to play in what does building an effective relationship with the students look like, and modeling that and coaching around that, because that's just as important. We cannot get young people and students to really be engaged and interested in the lesson if they don't feel anybody in that school cares about them as a person, the whole child, as you say. So I think that's a really key piece for teachers and teacher leaders.
Okay, yeah, and it takes me back to the EdPulse poll that I talked about before, about where most teachers saw the role of teacher leaders as developing that climate and culture in the school, which is about that relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of my fears about US education over the last decade, let's say, is I think most teachers in the classroom have been told the test scores are important.
Right.
This is what's going to categorize what you are doing in the school and what the school is doing. And they haven't been patted on the back enough for making relationships with students,
That's right.
knowing who those students are, or even knowing who their colleagues are. And I think many of them know intrinsically that those things matter, but they haven't been told those things enough, is my fear.
Right. Well, I was just going to say, I think there's also a role that the teacher leader plays outside of the classroom and outside of that school building in really trying to bridge that gap with the larger community. And how do you connect the school with families and communities? How do you help deliver better outreach and collaboration with the larger community as a whole, from parents and community leaders and organizations to really drive that support and engagement, all focused on student success?
In our building, we make it, it's very simple. They won't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And that's what it's really about with every child. And I think, in fact, not only have we put distance between teachers and students with the ultimate focus just on test scores, but because we're in such an overly litigious society, we've also put up barriers to teachers having relationships with children because some people made really stupid mistakes. And so then we end up developing policies and practices around preventing stupidity instead of allowing great things to grow. And I know my success as a teacher would not have happened if I didn't have deep and meaningful relationships with my students, with their parents, and with my colleagues. I learned so much when I had a group of moms over to my house one night we had moms and margaritas night at my house. And I thought, I need to know what's really going on. I was this young white teacher coming into a predominantly African-American community, and I needed to know the real scoop. And they schooled me, and they schooled me well. And it's driven who I am as a teacher ever since then. I don't know that my colleagues today, because Lord, I've been at this 20 some years, and I don't know that my colleagues today feel that they have that same opportunity to do that. And I think that is a problem because it is so much about the relationship. I have to know the whole child. I have to know what they're bringing with them. I'll never forget once I had a student who came in and I was just I was blessing him out, as we say, about the fact his homework wasn't done. And one of my kids said, you need to come in the hall with me. And I got taken in the hall by one of my students. And he said, did you not watch the news last night? That kid's mom was the one who was on TV and told me this long, sad story. And I'm like, oh. And I went back and I apologized to the child profusely for what I had done. And I'd let my goal of that one thing interfere with the relationship. And we can't do that. And the other thing is, there are some good models out there. And the Gallup's done a really good student interest survey. There's some other people out there who've done some good surveys. We can't just rely as educators on the fact of I think I know every kid or I think every kid knows I care about them. Sometimes it's important to have those measures where I, as a teacher, give a survey to my kids. And not that information has to go into my evaluation or anywhere else. It's part of my knowledge of my teaching to build so that I know whether or not I'm reaching my kids. And there's some good models out there for that.
Oh, there are. And there's some evidence out there as well. It's not whether we believe that we have a good relationship with the child, because we are coming at it from a certain perspective. It's whether the child believes it. And we may not even believe that we have a relationship with that child, but they may think that we do because of the way we interact. There was a story I talk about a couple of times over presentations, which was an unfortunate story where a child committed suicide in San Francisco and left a note for the principal. And in the note it said, thank you for everything, your friendship meant a lot to me. And the principal couldn't remember who this student was. But then remembered after a couple of days of anguish that this student was the first person they saw when they came to the school at 7 a.m. That they were sitting there by the side of the school before it opened, and the only interaction the principal had with that student was, good morning, how are you? Now, for our perspective, that wasn't a relationship. But from the student perspective, that was probably the only person that asked them how they were doing that day. And so I use the story because I think it's a good example of having to take their perspective, not our perspective, about relationships. I'm going to circle back to that article that Roland Barth mentioned before, because he didn't just talk about teacher parity or teacher equity as one of the barriers. Because I think there is an issue when we talk about the need for teacher leadership and the need for standardisation or standards or the need for building more relationship. The fact is that there are still campfires out there and it hasn't swept the nation as yet, but hopefully we are on a tipping point. So what he was talking about in this article as well was some of the other issues that has been holding teacher leadership back. And some of the things he mentioned were principals having total control, teachers' plates being full, a rivalry between teachers and principals, or an adherence to a business model that doesn't support teacher leadership. And by that, he was meaning distinct hierarchies and also the need to look for short-term goals all the time. And I want to get anybody's reaction to any of those points that he was mentioning, either to see if they're still current issues, or if you have suggestions about how we may overcome some of those.
We've touched on a lot of them, and we can talk a little bit more. I'll touch on the business model. And though he didn't particularly talk about this piece of it, it does permeate our schools right now, and that is a focus on market-driven results, looking at our kids as widgets, looking at our teachers as widgets, everything being driven by costs and production, and certainly there are learnings from every industry throughout our society. But when we look at our schools in that way and the teaching and learning process in that way, we go down, we make bad decisions, and we are going down a wrong path, and we're seeing more and more of that. So in addition to the hierarchy issue, where we know, as we've been talking this morning about teacher leaders and preparing that space for them, we cannot reduce our students or our teachers to widgets, and we cannot focus on profits instead of our kids and what's best for them. And so that we've been going down that dangerous road, and we're hoping that that's part of the tipping point where we'll turn back to focusing on the students themselves and making sure that all of them are successful, in addition to reimagining the roles of the principals and the teachers and other adults in that building in leading for the success of all of our kids.
I also think that when you look at the quote and it says it's never been a successful time, part of the reason that things haven't been successful in the past, I think, is because teachers didn't have the ability to communicate or even a common platform to start from. And I'm going to say two words that are sometimes, tomatoes can be thrown, but Common Core. I'm from Nebraska. We never adopted the Common Core, so it's really easy for me to talk about the Common Core. But I've seen my colleagues in other states who have adopted the Common Core as a means of teacher leadership, because they've seen this as we now have a common language that we can converse in across state to state, and that we can work from together. And because of the advent of technology, I can be, even though maybe I've got a problem leading in my own building, maybe something that the environment isn't right for that, I can be a leader online with other people, right? And so there's many different types of teacher leadership opportunities that are available now because of the advent of technology. And so we need to utilize those as we move teacher leadership forward, and we need to utilize the opportunities that things like Common Core can present when they give us the chance to stand up and say, I know how best to teach my students in this area, and we get online and we talk with each other about how best to do that, and then we allow that to grow even more. I think that's part of what's going to allow this to happen now.
And Maddie, we have a partner, NEA has a partnership with Better Lesson to do just
Absolutely.
that. And it's focused on Common Core, but actually it's broader than that. It's, high standards for kids, know what they should know and be able to do at every level. And what we've seen, the initial project was around developing really high quality lessons to actually teach the Common Core, but what we've seen is the emergence of teacher leaders. And what we've done is we've harnessed that excitement and that energy and that expertise and created a core of master teachers who are now actually not only talking online, but they're actually modeling the teaching of these lessons that are promoting higher level thinking skills and problem solving skills. I just got a chance to see one last week. It is phenomenal. These are teachers who would never, if you would talk to their colleagues in their schools, they would never have picked them to be the teacher, the leader. Yeah. They are finding their leadership opportunity in this different venue and in this different space because we've tried to create that for them. So that's a great example.
And I think it's so important that we do get out these examples and models of where this is working, how this looks, because I think the default, not only for teachers, but quite frankly, for all of us, is too much on my plate, right? Can't take on another thing. And if, folks had those stories and examples of how this is working and the benefits of how it's affecting the teachers, the school climate, the culture, the environment, the larger community, I think folks wouldn't be as hesitant and would see the benefit of engaging in leadership.
When I see teachers, when they talk about what's on their plate, too often, what's on their plate, quite honestly, is like jelly donuts and last week's leftovers. That stuff that they really don't need, that's not benefiting their teaching, that they'd like to get rid of, and they're willing to take something else on. Yeah. If you're telling me this is the meat and potatoes that are gonna make me better and healthier as a better teacher, they'll put that on their plate, as long as they're also given the autonomy to take something off that I know is not good for my kids anyway. Right. Just let me stop doing that. Let me focus on what is going to help my kids. Right.
And I would add, and when you say I have the power and control to make decisions, yes, there's no stopping them then. There's plenty of room on their plate. They'll get a bigger plate, because that's what teachers do, by nature it seems. And you give them that power and control, and it's very exciting. I have to tell you, I just got back from Nevada, where I was asked to talk about teachers' leadership. Here was this room full of 500 teachers on a Saturday who had come together, and it was a partnership with the Clark County School District, the Clark County Education Association, the Nevada Department of Education, the UNLV, what's that sort? Las Vegas.
Las Vegas, University of Nevada, Las Vegas.
Thank you. All of them together, including higher ed too, had formed this collaborative effort to train all of them, anyone who wanted to, as teacher leaders. And what was so exciting about it is they did the same thing. We have 3, but they have 7 domains. So no matter what your interest was, you could find a place to be a leader. Now that's everyone saying, we are going to do this together. We're going to resource it. We're going to support you. The principals that they're learning how to, work with these new leaders that they're training. It was quite exciting. So we're seeing lots of that happening all over the country to remove these barriers that you have up here. And I think our role and responsibility, and that's why I thank you for doing this, is to tell those stories so people know what it looks like and what it can be, and that there's lots of success out there.
And it's not only telling stories, it's also resourcing people to help do this work. Right. Yeah. This Saturday, we're gonna have a summit in Kentucky around Teach to Lead. We've got 100 teacher leaders coming in from around the area, Kentucky and all other kinds of places that have said, I have an idea. Help me come in and change my idea into an action plan, because then I'll commit to going back home and I'll implement that. And we've got Kentucky coming up this week, and then we're gonna have Denver the first part of January, and then Boston the first part of February. And these are teachers and we want more and more teachers. If people go to the teachtolead.org website, yes, shameless plug, the ideas have to be put in for Denver by Tuesday, December 9th, but then Boston will be out after that, and we want to hear from teachers who have great ideas. We want to look at those ideas, we want to bring them in, we want to build their skill set, and also give them the time and the resources, because we've got about 58 now support organizations on Teach to Lead. NEA is a support organization, AFT, Teach for America, all kinds of people who normally don't
ASCD.
ASCD, absolutely. You've got somebody coming to Kentucky who wrote a great idea,
That's right.
A teacher leader, she's coming. And so we've got these great partners who want to work with us, and we want to get them in touch with teachers, and that's an exciting thing that we're doing.
Yeah. No, the more you talk about it, the more it makes sense that when you start to get more technology and more avenues out there for teachers to connect with people who are like-minded, then it's going to be, even if you are wanting to keep teacher leaders down, it's going to be harder and harder and harder, because they're finding these connections. We were talking again previously about a Twitter chat last night, the ASCD L2L Twitter chat. 700 educators were on that Twitter chat, at 8 p.m. at night till 9 p.m. There is SAT chat that goes on that gets, big numbers. There's Ed chat that goes on. There must be at least a dozen or 24 educational chats that go on weekly, where these people are collaborating and connecting. And if they have another system or a focus around teacher leadership that they can start to concentrate on, then the world is open to them.
Well, every teacher comes into this profession wanting to make a change and to make a difference. And if you give them an avenue to do that, they are going to be voracious in how they go after that. If they see it feeding their success in the classroom, they're going to do more and more and more of that because it's meeting their basic need of success with kids.
Yeah, I mean, our experience is that teachers want to engage. Around the country, we've been helping communities put on Grad Nation community summits to really bring together diverse stakeholders in the community to talk about, what do we do to increase outcomes for our young people. And those are usually led on the community side. And so sometimes on the weekends or the evenings, but all of those summits around the country have great participation from teachers, from administrators, because they see this as not folks wanting to come in and take over or shaming them for what they're not doing. So how do we, fix this? But that this is all of our responsibility, and how do we all work together? So it's really been our experience that they want to engage, they want to reach out to the larger community and play a role in that, as long as that focus is on how those students are going to succeed. Because that's, like you said, that's why they got into the job.
Yeah, it's tapping into that emotion about why you're a teacher and what you want to do. And, I might get some pushback from plumbers, but I don't think there's probably a Twitter chat out there that plumbers get together and talk about their profession. Maybe there is. But there is an amazing number of educational Twitter chats out there where people want to utilise. I think it was, I might have his name wrong, I think it was Skip Heath, the author a while ago, who talked about you need to move the elephant and the rider, and the elephant is the emotion. Once you get a reason or an emotion behind something, it's hard to stop it, but you need the rider to actually control it and move it in the right direction. And I think what we're doing is we're tapping into these needs of teachers. All right, they need to make a difference, and if they're not necessarily making a difference in this setting, then they're going to go out into the technological world and make a difference there as well. We did have a couple more questions, but we're actually about a minute or two away from our official break. So I'm going to leave it, if you want to make a final statement or a final clarifying remark before we go to our 15-minute break, I'm going to give you this opportunity. Anyone have a final word to say?
Just thank you to ASCD for this opportunity. I think it's conversations like this that are going to change the culture, and we need to keep having these conversations to get more people involved. I'd encourage people, of course, to go to the teachtolead.org website and to learn more about Teach to Lead, and to put in ideas to be a part of this and to be a part of change, and let us help you be a part of that change.
Just a couple of things. I'll kind of end where I started in thanking ASCD around this Whole Child initiative. At the NEA, we are focused on not only on our teacher leaders, but all of our educators leading the way. We had an incredible opportunity actually to partner with ASCD just recently in bringing a training to our custodians and our support professionals in Utah so that they could be trained around instructional issues, leading on instructional issues. So it's all of us together, as Maddie said, it's all of us together doing that. I was sharing in the green room with Maddie a book that I like to talk about, and it's the power behind the title of the book. It's Leading When You're Not in Charge. And that's powerful, because it's not. It tells you that you don't have to wait for all the conditions to be in place. Right. Now, we're going to work very, very hard to make sure that we create those conditions for teacher and other educator leaders, but you don't have to wait. You can take that moment, that opportunity to lead. And as you all were talking about, if you build it, they will come, and they're ready. And I just have to say, what came into my mind was that old R&B song, "Ain't No Stopping Us Now." There ain't no stopping us now.
You can break into song if you want to.
I would.
I've heard you sing. You're pretty good.
Well, I also just wanted to thank ASCD for thinking about America's Promise and including us in this conversation and wanting that student and youth perspective. So we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, please join me in thanking our guests, Maddie, Becky, and Tanya.